Welcome to Rethinking with Alex Torpey. I am your host, Alex Torpey. In this podcast series, I'll be drawing on my experiences, which you can learn a little more about in episode number 8, to help give us a critical, nonpartisan, authentic space to examine some of the real root causes to the most important issues we see around us. We will question everything, and I hope to provide us a platform to rethink our minds, our communities, our republic, even our existence. Are there topics that you wish I would cover or someone that you think I should interview? Drop me a line at alex@rethinkingwithalextorpey.com. You can find the podcast on Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher, YouTube, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts, or at rethinkingwithalextorpey.com. Don't forget to leave a good review, subscribe, like, and share with a friend if you like what you hear. Enjoy. Hey everyone, and welcome to another installment here. I'm going to share a little bit about a motorcycle camping trip that I took around Death Valley and Joshua Tree in 2017. I'm going to share a little bit differently about this one. I've got some photos that I'm going to show you as I'm talking here, and with some labels about where they were. But I'm just going to share not all the details of exactly what I did and where I went and who I talked to, but some of the bigger picture reflections that I was doing and kind of why this trip was important to me at this time. Now, maybe most of us, have a hard time putting our work down. And relatedly, many of us have trouble experiencing the present or being intentional with our attention and focus. This is something that is becoming more widely understood as more and more evidence mounts, both in the kind of from the scientific community and from kind of public surveying and public opinion polling about how people are feeling and where they're spending their time. Now, this is not entirely our fault. For people who have jobs where the work is never ending, it's really challenging to draw boundaries and lines about where and when you can shut all of that off, especially if you care about the work and it has a purpose, and especially if you're working in a place where it's sort of the 24/7 always-on culture, and especially if you have a boss, and these two often go together, if you have a boss that doesn't accept anything other than exactly what they want whenever they want it, regardless of how that impacts others. So if your boss is calling or asks you to work on something, even if you're in the middle of something that you shouldn't be interrupted on, right, you've got to take that phone call and chit-chat with your boss about whatever random thing they could have made a voice memo to themselves about, or written down in a note or emailed to themselves so they could follow up on during business hours. My guess is many of us have had or are in situations like that. And we're also living in a culture in regards to sort of our expectations about response times and being on demand for other people that is only being accelerated in a very specific direction by the particular hardware and software technologies that we have developed. And the smartphones that we have and the advertising-driven social media platforms that fuel how a lot of us get information, these are largely driven by incentives that are not incentives that are aligned with us. And so the incentives of getting more attention so that you have more impressions and engagements to sell better advertising is not aligned with what our goals are when using these platforms or living on a day-to-day basis. We're going to come back to that more. And so this boundary or balance between work and life, or the ability to turn work off, the balance between connected and disconnected living, attention and distraction, these are topics that we're going to explore in a lot more detail in the podcast. You know, we're going to look at some scientific and academic and other evidence to understand what's happening and what some very specific things that we can do about that are, both in our personal lives and professional lives. And it was also a opportunity for me to sort of check in on some, bigger picture things that I had been working on in my personal life. In the prior few years when I traveled, I often had my phone off, during the day or maybe for a day or two. But if I was traveling domestically, I had phone service, in the times that I had it. And if I was traveling internationally, I often got a SIM card or, would use the Wi-Fi in the hostel or campground or wherever I was staying. And so, I wasn't totally disconnected, right? I was checking things in the evenings, checking things, in the mornings. I certainly wasn't on my phone throughout these trips, but I wasn't totally disconnected either. And there's a big difference between being mostly disconnected and totally disconnected. That's a big jump there. And so on this trip in 2017, I rode on a motorcycle I rented, a Tiger Triumph, an 800, which was a bike I always loved, but was a little out of my price range when I was getting mine, which is a Honda NC 700X. And so I navigated this trip as I often do on these. It was about 1,000 miles that I rode over the 6 days. I navigated that almost exclusively with a paper map. And it was funny because, paper maps these days, I remember paper maps as a kid in, road trips with the family, before MapQuest existed. But, so I'm in coffee shops and diners. I got all my motorcycle gear, jacket, helmet, gloves, and everything. Got this big giant map folded out on a table. For the life of me, I can do a lot of, I think I can take care of a lot of things when I'm traveling like this. I don't mind being, out in the desert on a motorcycle with no cell phone. But for the life of me, I cannot fold these maps back up into like the shapes that they come in. You've got to like really, really carefully, slowly do it. And usually it just, ends up getting folded incorrectly. So I'm like, I know people are like watching me in these diners, they're seeing me with my motorcycle gear, with the paper map, planning out routes, struggling to like fold this thing back up. And they're like, yeah, good luck to that guy, out there. But that was, that's kind of where I wanted to be on this trip. I wanted to be disconnected. I did have a backup phone that could connect to Wi-Fi. And, I was able to, I sent a check-in email to my family at one point, just letting them know that I was alive. And also at one point I checked the weather while I was out because it looked like it was going to rain. And rain in deserts can be very dangerous because of flash flooding, especially if you're on a motorcycle. Now, so this was kind of a big step for me, getting everything organized, setting up work, being able to actually unplug for that, amount of time. And it's actually easier than it may seem for people who haven't done that. Once you get past the first couple hours or day, like the first time, it's actually really nice. And you probably won't be missing your phone. You'll be enjoying the present. And time will kind of seem like you have more time almost. And the quality of the time is better. But the other piece of this is that, I was working on some sort of personal development on my own side. Years prior, I was on a path to burning out. From, maybe there's about 2 or 2.5 years there, from like around 2011, from when my campaign started, to 2013, maybe the summer of 2013. I did not take an entire day off, for those few years. Everything was suffering. My personal, emotional, existential state, my personal relationships, my health, and my God, my apartment. I'm not going to show a picture of that. And, all of those things, they influence everything else, right? They sort of spill over, seep into other areas and end up influencing your work. And so if I was already in an exhausted, fragmented state, and let's say, a council member in South Orange did something terrible, which, unfortunately happened on a few occasions, it was a difficult place to be starting from to deal with something like that. Already difficult, being, 23, 24 years old, trying to deal with some of these things, in a medium-sized town. But, the sort of burnout of everything else at the same time, was slowly taking me in a direction that was not good. I was spending about 30 hours a week or so mayoring, with some notable times, numerous occasions where there was like 14 to 16-hour days on town stuff, like during some of the major storms we had, like Hurricane Irene, Hurricane Sandy. Spending 20, 25, 30 hours a week on my business that we were starting, Veracity Media. I was spending about 15 or 20 hours a week volunteering at the rescue squad, though you could sometimes get other work done there. And I was getting my master's degree at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in the evenings. I would head into the city, after doing hours of town stuff and then hours of business stuff. I would 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I would head into the city to go to class at night, not getting back until, 8, 9, 10 o'clock. And so, that was going on like that for a few years. And in fact, I used to look forward to Friday nights because Friday night I would go to my work office, not my municipal offices, and I would get a lot of email and other stuff done because nobody else was answering stuff Friday nights. And so it was kind of like I would put some music on, like get some dinner, and just like answer emails, and that was like relaxing. And I wasn't really doing a ton else that I enjoyed. I barely had time for my personal relationships. I wasn't doing much photography, something I really loved. You know, I've got 15,000 photos, like camera photos, not including my like phone photos, you know, on my computer. And, you know, you can see all the high school, college, and then it drops off for a couple of years. And I just wasn't really doing much of that. I wasn't playing music anymore. Although it's a little bit generous to consider what I did with a drum set music. It was something that I did for many years and dabbled generously, let's use the word dabbled, with guitar and bass guitar also. And I wasn't doing any of that. I wasn't playing any tennis, which is something that I had played, you know, every day for many, many, many years. I wasn't really reading for fun that much. And I wasn't cooking, you know, I was just eating takeout all the time. And that wasn't sustainable, you know, in many different respects. And I needed to figure out something that would help me prioritize things better. I didn't really know this. But fortunately for me, you know, I had someone in my life who was really able to provide some perspective here. So Aaron, who I've mentioned, or who's been on some of the other episodes here, who's my former business partner, one of my business partners at Veracity Media, he had a much better outlook on all of this. And I think that's in part because his family, because he's part Spanish, and they have a much better, you know, at large, they have a much better take on all of these things and a better balance, and I think, than we do in the U.S., especially, you know, in the New Jersey, New York metro area. And so I think that, so we're driving up from D.C. at one point back up to New Jersey, New York. It was over the summer. It was really hot. I did not have functional air conditioning in my car at this time. We're like in traffic on the Dell Memorial Bridge. And, you know, just talking about that past year, 2013, which had a lot of ups and some big downs too. Including my personal life. And, you know, he provided some really helpful kind of perspective on how intentional he is with the time off that he takes and how important that is to sort of build into your life and not allowing, you know, other things to sort of erode this, but like putting your foot down and either figuratively or literally scheduling that time off for yourself and making sure you prioritize that. And it started to get me thinking about, you know, really where I was prioritizing my attention. This is an area that I've had to work on a lot over the years, and I'll share a little more about that when I come back to this topic more formally in an upcoming episode. Some of the challenges in my own life for many years, basically my entire life, with ADHD. And so, but I think things had gotten, you know, they'd gotten out of hand a little bit. I'd lost a little bit of control. You know, I'd lost my grip on, you know, some of the infrastructure that I had put in place to allow myself to really focus in a more constructive way. And so, fortunately, I was sort of, you know, prepared to think about these things because I'd spent so much time thinking about this stuff, you know, in my life in the past. And so, as soon as we started talking about it, we sort of realized he was right and had to build in some better ways to do this. And I started doing that around 2013 and over the following years when I did do some traveling, which I had not done before that. This all got kicked off in 2013 when I went to Rwanda. And this was not the plan, but when I was there, ended up getting engaged in some really fascinating, like, community development work, and it was just totally, fascinating is an understatement. And I learned so much in such a short period of time, and it opened my eyes to how much I could learn by traveling to other places like this, and sort of like getting deep into communities as best as possible, talking to people, learning about what they were working on, seeing different ways of doing things, reflecting on that in my own experiences, and bringing different ideas and thoughts back to my life, you know, in the U.S., in New Jersey, you know, in South Orange. So over the next few years, I had traveled, and like I mentioned, you know, some of those places were really interesting, and I'll be sharing some of those stories, but I wasn't totally disconnected when I was traveling. You know, I wasn't on my phone the whole time for sure, but I wasn't totally disconnected. And so this experience really sort of gave me that space and helped, you know, basically push me another level forward here. You know, I think this is something I have a very good handle on now, you know, but it's something that I've worked for many years on building. And it's a big part of what we talk about in my classes for management students in the public administration program, the MPA program at Seton Hall. It's a big part of what I do in my consulting practices and in how I manage other people, making sure to build in the sort of informal policies that allow people to go home. And I don't call people that work for me, after work unless it's an emergency, and setting that expectation with my bosses and building these things into actual work lives. And we're going to talk about that in this upcoming episode, how to not only think about some of these things, how to draw these balances, how to reflect on your goals in your personal life, but also your professional life. Because these trips for me, a lot of them were in January. I got into this sort of habit for a few years of doing the rescue squad, doing a shift at the rescue squad on New Year's Eve, which they sometimes had trouble getting people for. Doing that, spending, ball dropping, midnight, you're in the back of the ambulance, which was always interesting. And then hopping on a plane the next day and going somewhere new that I hadn't been and really giving myself the space to reflect on what I wanted to do the year prior. I had goals written down, how that played into my larger plans, multi-year plans of what I'm working on, what I was going to prioritize in the upcoming year. Really try to be honest with myself about how I was doing and not take for granted that another year had gone by. And so this trip was sort of it was like me ratcheting this up a level, in 2017. I think I moved it forward and created space for myself that was really valuable in reflecting on these things, and something that I've just gotten better and better at, since then over the years of disconnecting, taking that time off, and using that time to allow ideas and thoughts and emotions to percolate in my brain the way that they were designed to, not the way that we have been sort of unintentionally pushed into doing over the last 20 years. I mean, it's really recent that we are in this sort of hyper distraction economy. And that's not how most great ideas, that's not the environment that most great ideas come from. If we look back on, impactful and important historical figures, they're not doing 1,000 things at once, most of the time. They're deeply engaged in certain things. And so that's been important to me to be able to take that time, whether it's being able to, give myself an hour or two to work on a budget spreadsheet, on a Tuesday afternoon, or whether it's taking 5 days off to think about some really complex personal or professional, governance-related topics. So a book that, I discovered a few years ago that came from a podcast about this. I wish I had found this a few years prior, but it came from an article called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson, and the book is the same title, actually. It's been one of the books that students are able to read for an assignment in my class, and I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback about it. So if this has been interesting, that's one of the sources that I'll link to below, that you can go check that out. And if you're interested in this topic, the idea of how you create this balance, how you be more intentional with your focus, pushing back on this distraction economy, giving yourself the space to reflect on your own priorities, whether they be emotional priorities, professional priorities, or something more specific, giving yourself the space to think about original ideas, creative solutions, connecting dots that other people aren't connecting. I think that's where a lot of the value comes from in thinking through what we can do differently. And so I would just encourage you to check out the upcoming episodes about that, and appreciate you for joining me on this kind of unique installment here, where hopefully you've enjoyed some of these photos. I certainly can't describe how much I enjoyed, cruising out, ripping through the desert, the Mojave Desert, in the morning, as the sun, purple, pink, red sun is rising over the horizon, burning fog off the desert and the mountains in the distance. I mean, just truly incredible. So hopefully those photos have been interesting. Hopefully these reflections have been interesting, and look forward to talking more about this on some of the future episodes. Hey everyone, Alex here. If you want to find show notes, sources, and more information, you can do so in the YouTube description or online on my website at rethinkingwithalextorpey.com. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions or feedback at alex@rethinkingwithalextorpey.com or on social media. And if you liked what you heard, please consider leaving a positive review, subscribing, liking, or sharing this episode with a friend. Thanks again for listening.